Hello, hello. Don't mind me fussing with them stuff and figuring out whether I can put chat on another thing. And I believe I have my volumes set okay. So you're gonna see me. Oh, hello. I just realized something. This needs to be a separate window to work properly. That is for future reference. Hi, I'm Chris. I'm super out of focus until I do this. And now I'm much more in focus than I was before. Until I lean back. Alrighty, so welcome to the Airwindows Q&A. I am going to get my mic a little closer so that I can talk to people and in full MSR effect. Lean close enough and I can talk as quietly as I want. Yep. Actually, I should have it like this. There, if I sit comfortably. So, hey, you caught me working on a bunch of things. And I am... Oh, and look, a bunch of peoples. And what I'm going to do is I have called this Airwindows Q&A maintenance. And the reason for that is things have been a little insane around here, and that's very much the level that I'm working at. And we'll talk about various different kinds of maintenance. One of the ones that's been the most on my mind lately is maintenance of my frickin' washing machine, because sometimes real life comes and jumps on you. But it's not just only simple physicalities like that. There's also things like, did I make coffee? Why, in fact, I did. Am I getting enough sleep? Kinda, more or less. And what other scenarios could turn up to provide maintenance issues? And one of those could very well interrupt me in the middle of our stream, but it'll be for a good reason. There is a Eurorack thing that I went to get, and it's the last in a succession of things that have really thrown my maintenance into a loop here. By that I mean that one of the things I have to maintain is sort of mental well-being. Like, come to think of it. Oh, no, wait. Don't mind me. I'm looking at a bunch of stuff, and there's something that I can demonstrate to you that might prove interesting. Let us fire that up. Sometimes maintenance is getting your workflow, like what you're building, together to work correctly. So I'm going to take you a moment to show you something kind of weird that's going into my technical side and plays a role in going back and doing music, I have two different concepts for doing that. And you ought to be able to hear this. I have a new microphone. It's a hilariously old, beat-up microphone. And what you're hearing, if this is working correctly, is just me through the guitar amplifier, which also means I'll be able to talk in music jams, and I'm rethinking how that works for anybody who cares. If I rethink it well enough, it's possible that more people will care, because I'm like reevaluating how that stuff goes. But this also has another purpose. Whole reason I got this is because this is essentially the King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard harmonica chain on albums like I'm in Your Mind Fuzz. Gizzard has these mics. It's a Electro Voice mic. Here. Let's go back to this. This is an Electro Voice mic, and it's not actually very expensive. And I'm going to shut off the amp now. That's not really that difficult to, well, it's kind of difficult to hold in front of a harmonica. But there are a number of interesting things about it. Like, it's relatively cheap. It's still being made today. That happens to be an old, insanely beat up, weather-beaten one, which may actually be damaged to the point. Apparently, if you drop those on their nose, you can kill the high frequencies. I don't know whether that's happened to that one. It doesn't really sound like it. But the idea there is getting audio into music stuff that I do in a way that's accessible, and also having it getting audio in a cool sound. Like, if I cup that in my hands and speak right into it, it becomes a insane, it overdrives the amp super hard. So that's a way to, like, get sounds into a mix, maybe bury them in reverb, and then just make heinous noises like, and really go over the top with there. Or, in fact, hold the microphone and a harmonica and do that. And it's the same deal. If you want to overload the mic in the amp, what you do is you cup it. And that's actually going into the input that I use for the output of a Sonus G2M. And a really good combination of guitar to synthesizer, as I've been demonstrating this entire time, all the time that I've been doing the music stuff, is guitar into Sonus G2M, it's SONUUS G2M, into a Roland Alpha Juno 1 or 2. And there's a MIDI Club makes a thing called the Juno Control, where you can set it. Actually, I'm now curious, like, viewers are coming and going, and that's all good. Bo, are you still there? Bo said much better focus, and then everybody's gone dead, totally silent. So it becomes difficult to tell whether I'm just running my mouth. Oh, Joku is here too. Joku Sekovan. I assume that is how your name goes. Otherwise, correct me and I'll try to remember it. But yeah, I was talking about maintenance. Here's the deal. I need to maintain systems that are currently running. It's not necessarily great to let them sit for long periods of time, although sometimes you can get into a jam where, like for the music stuff that I was doing, I went for like 2 years doing extended music jams into SoundCloud and YouTube. And on first once a week, then it switched over to a couple of times a week. And then I started escalating to the point where I couldn't continue with it because I ramped it up to the stage where one person who said, "Oh man, it's so bad it's good," just blew a hole in the side of it, and I just stopped. Here's why that happened and how it relates to something like maintenance. For a long time there, I was just doing the thing to kind of do the thing. I wasn't trying to extrapolate it into a larger context. And it was a scheduled thing. I'm not the only person to experience this. One of my sort of streaming role models, Colin Benders, started doing COVID lockdown streams, which is more and more relevant these days. I tell you, that's coming back into focus in a big way. But he found that when he promised he was going to be streaming every day, he was making lots of music. And dialing it back, doing it less, taking it into a major studio to try to do like important stuff, amazing things happened, but also the frequency of streaming has dropped way down. And I've had similar experiences, like you start with something that is just, this is what I do at this time of day, and it ends up giving you lots of practice, and then you decide to scale it up, and like the expansion of the thing can be like a soap bubble. It expands to the point where it pops and is gone. Now that's not how I roll. I'm going to resume doing things because I can think of stuff to do. And part of what I am as Chris from Airwindows is always rethinking this stuff, including the stuff that seems obvious. It doesn't always work out. Like, if everything that I did had to succeed and work and be good, I would be in terrible trouble. I really need to do a bunch of stuff that screws up so badly that I have to stop and do something else. If I'm not failing hard enough to have to stop, I feel like I'm not doing my job. That said, maintenance also means keeping track of the state of that kind of stuff. Like going, how am I able to persist at this level? If I've been going at a particular level that was easy and not a problem, like with the music streaming, which I will be returning to, and I am working out a new context for that will cover my bases properly. But I was doing that in a context where it was fine for, like 2 solid years. And nobody was listening and it wasn't reaching anybody, but I was getting a lot of good practice. And when it started scaling up to where I was like, I think this should reach people. I've got a bunch of this stuff coming together. Yes, I'm learning neat things about it, but I'd also like to have those audiences too. I would like to be heard. And scaling it up onto that larger level was what caused a problem. And it requires sort of acknowledging, like, well, for instance, the plugins. And I'm not suggesting there's going to be a thing where it's like, I'm going to quit doing plugins. That feels like, no, that doesn't sound plausible. But all the same, I do stuff and do my like mad science I think of things like this page of notes is from doing the tpdf dither. I'm going, well, but what would happen if I, instead of doing exactly 2 noise sources, did a series of noise sources, like Gaussian, except for that Gaussian doesn't really work very well for dithers. And so I was like, well, what if I did like a dither where each new random source was at a golden ratio of the previous one? What would happen to make that start to add up? And much like Bo likes to do, Bo in the chat, I started throwing around the numbers and fooling around with it and seeing whether I could get a sort of elegant result, something where I was like, that's a really pretty equation. This thing comes out to this. And then when I take all these golden dithers and I do the average of it, the average is exactly also the golden ratio. Wow, I didn't know that was going to happen. Well, it didn't actually turn out that way, but it turned out that the average of a succession of golden ratio scaled increasingly small random sources. And I bet I can do that with my random code more efficiently, or indeed just keep a series of, this is me thinking of ways of actually making this work, right? So I don't know if I have that sorted out, but I'm exploring the idea of another kind of dither called golden dither that is, instead of tpdf, it's a sort of exponential tail of increasingly smaller random dithers that's kind of like Gaussian or something, only not. And there's 2 questions. One of them is, can I scale it to the point where it decorrelates all the moments of dither? And that is a interesting question, and there are people who understand that stuff even better than me, so I do have a place that I can go once I have a working test. And the second is, can I design this in such a way where there's an elegance to how it's constructed? And then the third question is, when I do it, what does that noise floor sound like? Because it's going to act like a tpdf noise floor in that it will be a decorrelating quantization distortion. And you already get that with the tpdf, triangular probability density function dither. So it's a question of, can I make a noise floor that sounds different or that sounds better, seeing as I've already got a tpdf that sounds better than normal implementations of it because it's offset slightly. So I started by going like, well, if I had this and instead of +1, -1 of the random sources, which gives me half a bit of averaged offset, if I went +1 minus 0.618 plus 381, which is 0.618 of 618, it's a golden ratio. That's actually also 1 minus 0.618. And then minus onwards and onwards as it gets smaller and smaller in the golden spiral, constantly going plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus. What is the offset that I'm going to get? And if I do get a offset, is that going to be correct right out of the gate? Or will I want to scale everything to some point? And I was like, what would happen if I scaled it all until the average was 0.381? In other words, the other part of the golden ratio, which was my initial thing, is take tpdf and scale it that amount by just applying another offset, basically. Well, the answer is I don't know, because I haven't done that one yet. And part of my maintenance is, first of all, writing stuff like that down when I think of it, and second of all, following through and doing the experimentation on it. I also have maintenance like this little note. It says base samples tape wounds. my bass, which is a very nice bass that I have not gotten nearly enough use out of because of always being busy doing all these other things, has roto sounds on it, has prog rock style round wounds on it. And I know somebody who persuaded me to go with tape wounds, and I'm increasingly of the opinion of I bet that would work. I bet that I would be able to do music and arrange it in such a way that I'd be happy with what I was making, and can put together a excellent sort of bass and drums backing that I can do neat things with. I play bass, I play drums. I feel like I don't necessarily do enough of all those things. So, and I'm getting damn bored of the example music that I made, which I made like months ago, and have not made any other music since, or indeed any music just about, because I've been keeping up with all of these maintenance things. So part of the maintenance here is I need to make a set of samples on that bass before I take off the round ones and put the tape ones on, which will then be permanent. And if they're that amazing, then maybe I would be making a set of samples of those, but that would be more like, oh, now this is for me to use. And in order to make the bass samples, I also needed to get the complement to this vocal mic here, which is another Roswell. Fortunately, the thing with Patreon and how things are moving is that I may not be able to replace my washing machine right off the bat, but by God, I can try out things that people might be interested in and tell you whether they're good or not. And the Roswell Colaris is definitely good. But Roswell Mini K47 turns out also to be if you need about $400 worth of condenser microphone, bam, there you go. That's exactly the one that you need, in my opinion. There's other things that you can get. Even Roswell has other models, but I feel that one is special, and I'm not the only one. Hey, Stephen. And one of the things involved with doing the bass samples was going, hey, the same guy telling me about these things was also telling me to stop using SM57s on everything. Like the bit of music that I keep using as a demo has SM57s on all of the drums, including the kick drum, which is in a funny position. I have a sort of triangle of drum mics, in that I have front, left, and right at about waist height, fairly close in, and then a microphone behind the drum stool pointing at the kick drum, and I have to switch the phase. And I've never gotten over the fact that in an early Logic video of this remusicking, I was like, oh, this I must be for inverse, and it's monitoring of some kind. But when you set up the microphones with the two basically forward mics, they're not overheads, they're side on to the cymbals, they're side on to the drums, but I'm doing that on purpose so that the room tone gets more lows and the attack is more edgewise. And if you mic a cymbal from the side, you're actually going to get more highs and less lows. If you mic it literally from the top, you'll get highs, yeah, but you're also going to get all the lows. And they're somewhat directional. So basically I have it side on to the hi-hat. And that's where I've got my microphone heights positioned. And then the one on the kick drum is behind the drum stool, so your body masks it a little bit from the snare. And it also ends up being side on to the snare drum, come to think of it. But that's what's on my most recent recording, but they're all frickin' SM57s. And I do like them for some things, but I'm being gradually persuaded away from them. And I'm getting ready, and have yet to actually do this, to try a drum recording using these Mini K47s. And because I chose them partly because of how amazing they were on drums. They are amazing. They sound absolutely and totally convincing, and not all bright and sparkly and tizzy like typical cheap condenser microphones. I was deeply impressed with that stuff, and impressed enough that I was willing to try something that the same guy, oh hey Elias, the same guy, William Whitman, advocated for, which was there's another number of concepts that I'm increasingly sold on with this guy. He likes the flat wounds on Rickenbackers, and I see more and more examples of that out there. By the way, once you start paying attention, you're like, oh hey, that person's playing a Rick, but I don't hear any clang. Maybe there's like flat wounds on there or something. And you realize that there are examples of stuff that you absolutely love that were done that way. But another couple of things that he's gone on about over the years are hitting SM57s, hitting Steely Dan. I can't get with him there. I love Steely Dan. But hating SM57s and thinking that they're this obnoxious, horrible mid-range mess of yuck. I do feel, especially with the Airwindows modified SM57, that the ability to pin down a really close-up mic on something, like find the exact correct spot on a speaker cone where your heavy metal sound is coming through perfectly, find the exact right sound on a acoustic guitar body, for instance, where it's exactly the right tone that you need. You can't beat especially Airwindows SM57 for that purpose, but they still sound the way they sound. So I went for upgrading my guitar tone as well. And the guitar tone is essentially ISO box. So I've got the guitar box in here. And you got your microphone in here, and then I have a lot of padding and stuff in there, because part of the SM57, and I've got that pointed wrongly. This is how you would really do it. The microphone is not dead on. It's pointing away from the center of the cone and moved this direction, so you're getting like the edge of the cone. You're intersecting it around there. So I did my best to damp down the inside of the ISO cab, because I was like, this has nothing that anybody would want inside it, so let's just fill it with padding. Let's fill it with towels or something, which I did. And anybody that's been hearing my guitar playing on streams and stuff, that's always what you're hearing. It's a real amp, it's a real speaker cabinet, but it's in an ISO box. And Whitman is advocating for not using an SM57 in anything, basically. Certainly not everything, but then also not anything, because he figures everything is better served by something else. So I was looking into these Roswell Mini K47, and they don't, you know perfectly well they don't pay me. I'm not nearly big enough for anybody like that to support me. If they did, I would say so. It goes absolutely the other direction. All these things, like you can see, I'm not making enough money to be interesting to manufacturers, and that's not likely ever to change. But I've been able to get some of these things, and I get to try them out and talk about them. And the thing about the Mini K47 is it doesn't have that high frequency glitter that you get on condenser mics a lot. So I took one and I stuck it inside the cab. It ends up looking kind of like this. And I positioned it and angled it, and then I was like, hang on a second. This is a condenser mic. No matter what I do, it's going to pick up the reverberations of the inside of this ISO box. It's just not going to isolate as well as an SM57. If I put towels in here, it's going to add the sort of coloration of a ISO box that's full of towels. And yeah, SM57 can be a desert island mic, particularly like if you are performing live, the ability to reject outside noise is crucial. It is absolutely indispensable. And, you know, I have a video up, the Airwindows SM57 mods, where I'm able to make them sound pretty awesome. Even, you know, just buy a stock one for less than $100 and carve away at it in the way that I show, and you get about as much out of them as you possibly could. Thing is, set up like this with the condenser mic, very different scenario. And you remember how I have a plugin called Ombre? Ombre, the plugin that's a couple of different delay taps, one of them in phase and one of them out of phase, and you're sculpting the cancellations and things to make a comb filtery kind of effect that is also filling stuff out with a bit of extra ambience in there. And there's probably a fruit to dive into that as well. Like I could probably get into doing a Ombre style plugin where you say defined like, okay, reinforce this frequency and let's cancel out this frequency. And it would start throwing around delay taps and moving them until they intersected in that particular way. Like it would make it like, okay, you can have this delay tap and this delay tap and this delay tap, and then they will coincide in both of those places. So you're going to boost here and maybe slide it up and down a little bit and cancel here. And the difference with using a condenser microphone in an ISO cab is it picks up everything. So Ombre is about making that ambience. I asked myself, well, the ZZ Top folks never talk about what they've done. Terry Manning is very closed about that kind of stuff, and that's how Billy Gibbons wants it, and they don't tell their secrets. But, what if they made a kind of ISO cab that was so small it didn't even seem like a room? Like a live ISO cab, not a dead ISO cab, a live ISO cab. And that would be the same thing as any ISO cab in the sense of you'd be able to use it in an apartment, you'd be able to do whatever with it, and it would make certain things more accessible. But setting it up correctly, you'd also have a built-in kind of ambience effect that's going to be the same regardless of what you put through it. And is it possible to design that in such a way that it works musically and is good? The answer seems to be yes. And so when I go back to the maintenance thing of like doing the bass samples so that I can put on the tape wounds, so that I can do a new bass tracks and more music again, using, because the other part of maintenance is having figured stuff like this out, now I can't go forward with the previous arrangement. So part of what I've been doing is taking apart my entire studio and rebuilding it with the new ISO cab configuration. Bo, as far as what would, something I have not brought, maybe the reason you're not seeing anybody in chat is because I didn't give you chat. Let's fix that. Yay! Look, people, I'm sorry for being so late and not bringing you on, but now I have fixed it. There you are. Like I said, the thing about this is maintenance is how many balls you can keep in the air at one time and what do you do when they start to drop. And it's a fairly serious concern. Like, I never actually got around to, and I'll be going until like 12:42. The income from the Patreon scaled down a little bit, so I don't have to commit quite as much time. See, no, tomorrow is Tuesday. It's Wednesday that we do the Minecraft thing. I was talking about isocabs. I'm drawing little pictures of them. So what you do is you get a K47, a mini K47. It's a good 4 times the price of an SM57, but here's how this works, is you put that in your isocab, but you make the isocab empty rather than filling it with sound damping material. Like, your speaker could still have, like, if things are resonating in a horrible way, then you maybe want to avoid that. But what you do is you make your isocab and put a condenser mic in there, a good one, not a shrill, tinny sounding one, and then allow the isocab to bounce the sound around and back, and it needs to be large enough. Mine, fortunately, is large enough that it's not too tiny and box-like, but it's inevitably going to be tiny and box-like. But sound that's bouncing off the back wall is going to come back forwards again. There's going to be a sort of comb filtery effect, and the high frequencies will reflect around in there, and they're going to be picked up by the microphone. So what you wind up getting is a micro ambience. And I did this, and stuff started immediately, like, I actually had the speak earlier, like, rewind to YouTube, okay? So when I was demonstrating the little microphone that I have plugged into it, that was that isocab, and that was that condenser microphone in there. So when you heard that, that's what you were hearing, is the live isobox. And that, TH Watt, that's exactly what I was thinking. I haven't done it yet. But if you build a isobox with non-parallel walls do not automatically fix things. You might think in terms of some kind of diffusion in there, rather than simply non-parallel walls. Those will distort modes. They won't make them go away. Non-parallel walls don't remove room modes, but they will distort them and make them a little weirder, and they will do good things to avoid flutter echoes. But the thing with, don't mind me looking over my shoulder to see whether mail is coming. I was going to get on towards some of the maintenance things. Part of what I was saying here is maintenance has meant I need to do samples of this bass to be able to put on the tape wounds, which is another chore that I have to do. So I had to revise the entire isobox until I had, and this is why I'm not going to make that one be non-parallel walls like right now, so that I had the new microphone set up in there so that I could make my bass samples and give them to you, because I distribute the stuff that I make when it's like musical tools and things like that. That needed to have the new mic rather than the SM57 configuration, because I tried it and I was like, yep, this works. And with the live isocab, I was getting more of your sort of ZZ Top, juicy, chunky kind of Texas soul thing going on. It was getting more of that effect than it had before. So I don't know whether that's the case. Like, I've also thought that maybe one of the things that Billy Gibbons and company were doing was interesting experiments in reflections and things. Like, if you have a surface and a microphone, and you have something like this calculator that can reflect sound, you can go slightly off axis and put the reflector so that it is near the microphone. And then when I turn this to perfectly reflect where my voice is and reflect it into the microphone, listen to the change in the sound as I do this. Now you're going to hear a very close-up reflection of just the back of the calculator. And that is going to be essentially directed by where this reflective surface is and what it's doing. That was another thing that I thought maybe Terry Manning was up to with working with ZZ Top. Now, the interesting thing about using reflectors in this way is that the size of it determines the frequencies. It's exactly like a PZM microphone, a pressure zone microphone, where if it's larger, it'll go downwards in frequency more. If it's really small like this, it's only going to reflect the extreme highs. And that's one of the things I thought maybe Terry was up to, because what I hear in that ZZ Top stuff is this blurring and increased ambience around the highs and stuff. It's the opposite of your dead 1970s studio sound. Some things would be really dead, like drums. Drums would be damped to crap. But other things would be very live, but they're not really like huge space live, or if they are, it's an intentional effect. Instead, they're like micro spaces, micro echoes, little flanginess, and the sheer naturalness of it led me to wonder whether or not it was down to acoustic qualities. And this would be probably, I can't speak to this, and he probably wouldn't tell me if I asked him, but I can ask him about photography. He's really into photography. But Terry Manning worked with Led Zeppelin before doing some of these ZZ Top albums where all this interesting ambience is happening. And one of the things that Jimmy Page really, I wouldn't say necessarily pioneered, but I feel like he really was pretty groundbreaking, even if he wasn't literally the first ever to do it. Jimmy Page was using multiple microphones and using acoustic cancellations and flangy effects and things on purpose, in reality, not on the mixing board. He liked to put up multiple mics. He liked to use the spaces around him. And it's the same kind of thing of like, if you want to make stuff sound farther away, you'd better mic them from farther away. Famous example, the guitar tone leading off Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd. Down, 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 down. Amazing sound. How do you think they got that? Not in the box. And also, not in a close mic. The thing about the Shine On You Crazy Diamond guitar sound, and there are documentaries talking about this, is that to get it big enough, he got a couple of different amplifiers. I don't remember exactly which. Tend to be Fender amplifiers, if I'm not mistaken. Those are really bright and aggressive. And he went out into like Abbey Road Studio A. He went out into an orchestral recording thing and put him in the middle of the floor. And then he put up a mic like 20 feet away. Really distant microphone. Getting all of the ambience, but also those are really bright guitar sounds, but when you pass them through 20 feet of air, a lot of the edge naturally wears off, gets combined with acoustic ambience and stuff. And so you have a sort of orchestral, bright, clangy guitar sound rather than a super upfront studio dead bright clangy guitar sound, which is a completely different experience. And these are things that are worth experimenting with. all of that stuff, like the difference between these things is also in the high frequencies quite often. Like you're going to have one of the things when people joke around about ASMR responses and stuff. Even small differences in distances and differences have a very big effect. Like, if I'm talking from back here, I can still talk loudly enough, and you can hear the S's in my voice and stuff, and that's like maybe 2 feet of difference. But if I'm right over like this, I have to talk much more quietly. But one thing you can tell about this is the high frequencies are going to be a lot brighter because I'm that close to the microphone. And that's the ASMR thing, like in a nutshell right there. It helps if you have a good mic to do it with, granted, but one of the things about that is distance from your miking is very significant, and that is down to passage through air, which also means it can be modeled. I have constantly had a series of plugins for trying to fool with stuff like that. Most notably distance, where I literally tried to do that. And Bo, as far as Billy Gibbons and stuff, Billy Gibbons is not a trustworthy source. He will lie, and he talks nonsense sometimes, and then sometimes he'll talk sense. But the impression that I've had is that he plays it a little close to the vest with some of his ideas, and so it's down to trying to figure out what you did. But it's fairly clear to hear that indeed they were using small and old amps, and the room they record in isn't necessarily a huge ambient room, but that's, part of that. So I was talking about maintenance being the name of this thing. Part of that is just being able to follow through a series of tasks to get to an end result. And doing it properly, like you get used to whatever it is you've put into place. Like I forgot that I had the condenser mic there when I was showing the other microphone that I got. If anybody wants to see that again, I can go and drag it out again. For the purpose of replicating the King Gizzard harmonica recording chain for certain things. And they don't always use the same stuff, but there's pictures, even in concert, where the harmonica player there, Ambrose, I think, is using that little old EV microphone. And it's actually a newscaster mic, and it is omnidirectional, so you don't really get a massive bass boost if you cup it and speak into it, but you don't necessarily get a bass. It's very it's flexible. Here, I'll grab it again, and I'll fire it up again. Because one of the things also that is good is keeping stuff handy so that it's all running. Yeah, and I can also show you the thing that I'll be doing when it's time to model this mic in this series of things that I'm doing. This is the lav that I'll be using, and I'll be placing it like right next to the mic there, maybe even tape it on or rubber band it on or something like that, at enough of a distance that it'll be extremely clean. And yeah, now I've got this going again. So here is my example of this old Electro Voice mic. And what you're hearing is me going through the guitar amplifier. If it doesn't sound loud enough, well, we can make that be loud enough. And It's Omni again. Oh, tape uses floating point dithering, but it is not a output thing as far as doing dithering to fixed point. But also what you're hearing here when I'm demonstrating this ridiculous mic is that condenser mic in there. And this, when we were talking about the speaker and ISOCAB and microphone and stuff, you're now literally hearing the result of that, and only that, because I've shut off the good condenser microphone. All you're hearing now is this mic going through a impedance matching transformer. It's a short impedance matching transformer, just like you would use to go from like a harmonica into a little tube amplifier that distorts a little bit if you push it, and then into the condenser mic here in a ISOCAB that is pretty much completely live inside. Like you can see, this triangle here is a tripod. It's actually not to scale, it's a little larger than that, but goes right up to the back wall. But I have a piece of sort of insulating material, which is, God, what do they call it? Storm King or Winter or something or whatever. But it's aluminum foil with a foam backing that you can stick to stuff. And I used some of that and then sort of doubled it over and folded it on itself. So I have a little plank of foam with aluminum on the outside covering the base of the tripod stand inside the ISOCAB, and the rest of it is completely live. So what you're hearing is the speaker and the microphone, and me talking loud enough that it's overdriving the amp a little bit. Basically same thing as a little close up on. I'm on you. In fact, I can step on this and a little close up on that. And that is what I've been able to do for a guitar rig going forwards, continuing to try to maintain stuff by improving it and getting it to be better. And let's see now. I think enough of this again. You've now heard it. You've heard what I was talking about. Back over to this. I think maybe my chat is deeply, deeply delayed. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. I'll keep talking to you guys until you're finished. People can watch on replay and stuff too. So there's that. And it's kind of fun doing this sort of thing. A other maintenance thing I was going to get to, now that I've talked about that, now that I've talked about some of the things that I've got in store, is challenges and stuff where maintenance means keeping yourself healthy and not burning out and going splat. And I've been running into issues with that in the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to tell you what they are. I don't know if anybody else experiences this. Maybe it's just me. But I will tell you what's been going on, which is also in a very large extent to why I am not able to leap forth and do more amazing music immediately right away. Through the combination of pursuing this stuff, trying to fix the busted clothes washer, or at least empty it, which I finally was able to do, ordering various things and having them get delivered. I've had a situation where for the last couple of weeks, every single day has had me sitting there waiting for something to be delivered by like UPS or the post office or something like that. Every single day I've sat there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And sometimes this stuff hasn't been delivered and sometimes it has. But when something like that is going on, I lose the entire day to some extent. Like, I can still do things, but if I get too deeply buried in doing things, like if I was coding this, for instance, the Golden Dither idea, I would run the risk of not being able to respond to the door. I was doing something. Another thing that you can't actually see at the moment is it's roastingly hot, and my air conditioning is not in this room. And I'm lucky to have air conditioning at all, frankly, but I have this room set up so that it doesn't have as many noisy fans and things going on. But I can keep it cooler by pulling all the shades and being like a little cave troll in the dark. And I've done that before. It's almost like being some kind of space guy, like living on the moon or in outer space or something, where it's like, you don't get any sun. If you got sun, it would just burn you up. You'd wind up getting skin cancer immediately because there's no atmosphere, so no sun for you. You live in a cave now. And I've lived like that before, so that doesn't throw me so bad. But what was a problem was I could pull all the shades, live that way, and have it not get so hot that I couldn't think here. But I pulled all the shades, and then people who were supposed to deliver stuff, for which I was waiting all day, like literally waiting all day, decided that I wasn't there because all the shades were pulled and went away. And I was like, yeah, I failed to get the delivery. Really, I need to get a shipping and receiving person or something like that. I'm decades away from being able to justify anything like that. I suppose I could get a shipping and receiving person. Like, okay, you can be my receiving person, and then you just get my stuff. And then, bye. So that might not work out very well practically. But in a situation where I have things like, this thing arriving, that thing arriving, I'm very excited about trying to do a thing with the Eurorack stuff. I've mentioned how I'm going to be doing VCV Rack, but I'm still interested in the analog stuff, although I am less and less convinced that what I need to be doing with it is really doing extended jams and then calling them discrete musical compositions. I got into this phase where I was like, I will come up with a name and I will do a cover art for everything that I've done, like within an hour after I finished doing it. And that was interesting and exciting and fun. And I feel like some of those were good, but sometimes it was more of a stretch. And I feel that contributed to getting in the way of me doing more. It started becoming too hard. And so I'm probably going to be calling stuff like, okay, this is Airwindows Musical Research Lab or Sonic Research Lab, much like the survival research labs where they make giant robots that blow each other up. And one of the things that I'm adding, which is one of the things that has been shipped and that I spend entire days waiting on tenterhooks for the thing to arrive so that I can go, the door, somebody's knocked at the door, and run over to get the door and receive the thing. And then bring it inside and go and wash my hands. These times, man, I gotta tell you. So a thing that has been supposed to arrive, and hopefully will finally do so today, is a little device called the Sleepy Circuits Hypno. And I've got a workflow worked out where if my theories are correct, I can patch stuff in the modular jam into the Hypno, which then generates visual effects, very good visual effects, by the way, and pipes the visuals through a little orange cable that you can't really see, but a little orange cable that I've got over there, into the computer, which now I've got a computer that can handle this sort of thing, at which point I will use OBS to layer it with Luma keying so that whatever I'm doing visually with regards to the OBS camera and doing my visual, my flashy lights and stuff, because I do like doing that. I've put a lot of effort into doing that. There will also now be generated visual effects, much like if you were using a projector to project visual effects onto your band or whatever. And that is supposed to show up today. It was supposed to show up over the weekend and totally didn't, and I spent entire day. This is what I was going to ask people. It's like, has anybody else related to this, or am I just this particular kind of insane where this is only my burden to bear? That if you know that you have somebody coming and bringing something to you, like a delivery person, especially if they need signatures and stuff, not that they really do that anymore, but does it completely take over your life? Like, are you unable to do anything else while you are waiting for a thing to happen? Because I get that a lot. It's probably the autism. And that's been going on for weeks. So I'm despicably fried by all of that kind of stuff. And I'm glad that I've got plugins to post. But if you're wondering why there's not more music and stuff, it's because I can't function. I can't function at the moment because this is going on. And it ain't necessarily stopping anytime soon because, washer's broken, need to fix that. I had my house inspected because I got a Section 8 thing going on where I have to get inspected by Vermont State Housing Authority. And I had to fix a number of things. I had to go and get my tax paperwork back so that I could get documentation that my furnace was cleaned, and which I've done that now. And I also had to replace a stove range hood because I had this hood over the stove with the fans and stuff, and it wasn't good enough. It didn't exhaust like heat and smoke and stuff worth of crap because it was a cheap piece of crap. And so I basically took the metal parts of it and carved them away with tin snips until it didn't, I'm 6 foot tall, so I didn't like how I was looming over this thing and I couldn't see what was going on in the stove. And also stripped away everything around the fan, so it's just this bare fan exhausting air, which made it run a little bit better. And then the inspector from the housing authority did not like that at all and was like, that should be a fail. Will you replace it? And I was like, yes, I'll replace it. So that showing up as well. So I have a bunch of stuff that I'm doing. I don't need to get into a lot of details. Amount of time spent talking about that versus spent talking about ISO boxes is very small, and that's the way I like it. But maintenance is weird. Like if I went out and caught COVID again, I wouldn't be able to go to the hospital because it's not like I can afford stuff like that. So I would be having to drag myself around, filling myself with vitamin C, or ginger tea, or God knows what, all that kind of thing. And it would make it impossible to do regular, ordinary work, and that's what happens with life stuff as well. So these are the challenges, and that's why I called it maintenance. This is after 2 weeks of really incessant struggling with this stuff. And there's nothing I can do about it. I could have stuff that I've decided to get and have it bounce back and go back to whoever I bought them from undelivered because I didn't answer the door. That doesn't seem good. It's possible if I fall apart bad enough. And excuse. Last of the coffee. Maintenance can even involve things like this. I tried to sell this a while back. I had it because I was like, oh, hey, very cool input for stuff. and then there was nothing I was really going to do with it because I didn't do in-the-box things. But I can plug this into the keyboard, and this is what I can use to get musical notes into VCV Rack now. I tried it out, and it's probably one of the things that I will do when I get that up and rolling. But digging that out after having tried to sell it and failed, and finding a suitable cable for it. The suitable cable for it here, I'll show you some of the other things as far as that concerned. This is a suitable cable for it because the cable will fit on my desk without being unreasonable size, but you can also see that this has been carved away with an X-Acto knife because the cable didn't fit the little keyboard thingy. The little keyboard thingy had the bright orange cable that it came with, and when I tried to put it out to sell, somebody stole the USB cable out of it and then left it. And I was like, well, that not only didn't sell, but now I'm out of cable. Cool. So I got this one, and so I had to carve the plastic away until the little itty-bitty cable will fit. And maintenance, it's doing all of these little things patiently, one at a time, identifying them, making lists of them fairly often, and doing them. And it becomes just a matter of tenacity and sort of pacing yourself, honestly. Let me have a quick look at chat. We're 12:10, so we've got about another half an hour or so to go. Yeah, Stephen K. Yep. The degree of OCD, that's the thing, is what happens to me is that stops me doing stuff. Like if I need to do samples of the bass so that I can replace the strings into what I consider will be the permanent strings, and I know that I don't have the guitar cab and ISO cab stuff worked out because there's other stuff that I needed to do first, then I'm absolutely not going to be making those sets of samples because I'll know that it's wrong. For instance, I trimmed my fingernails because they were getting kind of long, but I've allowed this one to grow a little bit because when I do those bass samples, I'm going to be using this finger as a pick. Because when I do that, I can get this sort of big, beefy, heavy chunk. And this is not just only me that's ever done this. You can use a real pick on a bass, but the fellow from Chic, Nile Rodgers' cohort, Bernard, I should know this guy's name. Was a brilliant bassist. He's passed on now. He was known for, I forget exactly what they called it. Things get too demanding, and my brain starts leaking out my ears, and I can't remember anything. But in stuff like Good Times and whatever, a lot of those cheek bass parts, especially if it's like that's not a picked part. That is a put your thumb against your finger and use the edge of your fingernail. Scrub that on the bass string. It's much heavier than using a pick. It's beefier sounding than using a pick, but you still can get kind of an effect like that. You're basically, that's your downstroke, and you can do an upstroke also and get the bass string with the corner of your fingernail. But that is a reason why doing that particular thing can require me waiting until the fingernail grows out. Stuff like that. So the thing about the OCD and the burning out and not being inspired when things aren't exactly right is with tenacity and patience, I can get to the point where I have done the things and all of my little ducks are in a row, all the things are correctly done, and it'll show in the end result, like those chic bass parts done with the finger as a pick kind of thing, the fingernail as a pick, and it's a lot blunter than using the actual pick. That is a distinct sound that you would not get just fingering or using a regular pick on a bass. And if I had the SM57 on the bass, well, you've heard that over and over on the musical things that I've been using for examples for the last 2 months. That is a bass sound that's kind of neat and also kind of sounds small and like SM57s because that's what I had. And organization is pretty key with this stuff. Like right now, my organization is a whole scattering of little notes in front of me. And one of the things that I did was I cut them down into little bitty chips of, like, here's another one. Move DVDs, diffusion. Over my left shoulder is a set of shelves on the wall. There are probably times that people have actually seen those. And they've got a bunch of DVDs and they got a bunch of musical stuff on them. And like wires, guitar strings that haven't been put on guitars yet. But one of the reasons that stuff is there is because that is reflective surfaces. That's not just a regular wall. That is a sort of faux diffuser. It's just not a very good one. It's okay, but it's better than a flat wall, and it's not a real diffuser. And one of the things I have in my list of stuff to do, and this is the kind of thing, it's not stopping me from getting back into music because I'm not like mixing the music jams that I do. I'm sitting like over there or standing up when I'm doing the music jams, so that's not even the same thing. But if I was going to be mixing or mastering people's music, that would probably be limited to after I have done the move DVDs and get and install some studio-style diffusion on that wall. Because the situation I'm in as far as doing this, that would be a big enough change that I would need to have that and get used to it before I was ready to go forwards. By the same token, I need to have the Sleepier Circuits Hypno, the thing that will do visual effects that I can pipe into the computer, and that would be a neat bonus to all that kind of stuff. It'll make the whole mad scientist science laboratory thing be even crazier, and will play into the generative music thing that I'm doing. I need to get that going and also get used to it enough that it kind of does what I intend, or at least be willing to patch it in and start fooling with it. And again, other things. And the danger of this is that you have so many things, like here's another one. Download DMG. I have the DMG files for my old audio units, all the ones that have demos on the Airwindows website. And one of the things I need to do is go in there and update hundreds of WordPress posts so that they point to the final product rather than just the demo. Because we're way, way, way past the days when people would still be trying to buy the final products. And I would let them if they really needed that, because they couldn't wait for the VST to come out. Well, most of those VSTs have come out by now. Most of those VSTs are already in service at this time. So there's nothing stopping me from uploading the DMG files and updating all of the WordPress posts, hundreds of posts, since 2007, so that if you click on them, you don't get the demo, or maybe you could still get the demo, but you click on them and you get the final thing, like what I used to sell back in 2007, the old DMG file, the backups that I had for supporting, tech supporting people when their hard drive died and they needed to send them another copy of what they had purchased through Kagi. I've got all of that stuff. I need to put it up. That one I've been delaying just because it's an ugly, ugly task. That one is hour after hour after hour of sitting on the WordPress site, manually updating all of the little files, and then editing every post by hand to make it point to the correct final version rather than the demo, and then probably testing it, like clicking it to see if it actually downloads. At which point I would tell people, oh hey, by the way, the entire history of Airwindows is now free. All of the stuff that you used to have to buy through Kagi or whatever, nope, all of that is now free. Not all of it is VST yet, but if you're on a Mac and you're able to use audio units, it's going to be days of work getting that together. I'll do it, but it's going to be days of work. So that, moving the DVDs and putting in diffusion. I am about halfway through this tiny piece of... I cut them small so that they're less intimidating because I have entire pages filled with these things sometimes. Lyric Dict. I took the dictionary that is used in the XKCD side project Upgoer 5 text editor. Upgoer 5... Oh, Marissa, that's not actually how I work. That's rarely how I can do it. What I need to do is just do like 70 or 80 for half a week until they're all done. Because building 10 or so every day starts to become, that's all I think about. And at that stage, I might as well be, maybe it's another autism thing. Like Defenti is talking about that. I've got autism too. Yep, absolutely. And so if I was doing the 10 DMG updates and stuff, I would be super heavily focused on that. And then when I was finished, I'd be super heavily focused on the 10 that I was going to do tomorrow, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. So yeah, it's going to be the bigger task rather than little bits, because I can't really do that. That's doing small bits of stuff is not something that I'm really psychologically able to do. It's one of the reasons why I am Chris from Airwindows, for good or for ill. Oh man, I had somebody posting on the YouTubes that was like, this is all complete nonsense. This guy is the worst snake oil salesman guy in the world. And I was like, okay, yeah, knock yourself out, man. I guess you can argue people to run away from the Patreon, that nothing is forcing them to stay engaged with in the first place. And I keep telling people, like, yeah, if you need to take care of yourself, then drop the Patreon for the time being. I'll be fine. Yeah, but I got another hater. I got a fellow who was not so much going after like my music or anything like that, but was like, oh, I remember what it was. It was Baxendall. Somebody posted on Baxendall the YouTube video for it, and they were like, this is the shittiest thing, and it has weird cancellations and doesn't even sound like a Baxendall. It sucks. This guy is the worst ever. He is the worst snake oil salesman ever. Beware. Okay, you can get a bog standard digital filter anywhere you like. All of the DAWs have that stuff built in. What they don't have is interleaved IIR filters or interleaved biquads, and that is part of what Baxendall is using, and that is why it has the behaviors he was complaining about, and that also is why it doesn't sound like the DAW filter. And there are people who like it, and it's not a requirement to like it. There are people. One of the things about funny comb filtering and stuff is we hear through that stuff really easily, because that is a part of our acoustic environment everywhere we go. Our ears are predisposed to not notice funny little cancellation nodes and things. And if we are able to improve audio in other ways, and the penalty is having some funny little nodes in there, typically that is a worthwhile trade-off. But yeah, trolls gotta troll. I do honestly feel that if you're not doing something worth trolling, then you're probably not doing something. So, mind you, having the fortitude to stand up and be like, okay, knock yourself out. Because it's better doing that than responding to trolls by being like, I will silence you. Never try to silence trolls. It only encourages them. But being able to bear up under that kind of stuff is really kind of important. And that's another maintenance thing. That is another maintenance thing regarding staying healthy enough to endure people throwing crap, to endure the reality of, like, there's people who are super mad at you, or there's people who super don't agree. And, you can go and look at them, like that fellow, because sometimes I go and look at them. That fellow was a throwaway account, and that's fine. And then there was another person who was like, I want double-blind tests on your dithering stuff. And I was like, yeah, nobody's ever going to be able to hear 24-bit dither on double-blind test. It's also worthwhile doing stuff that you can barely hear, or that you only hear once in a while. And some of us like that, smile. And that guy responded very positively to being told, like, that's fine, I'm not going to do it because the level of stuff that I'm working at is not what you would consider significant. And I'm interested in this stuff that is less significant than that sort of documented, provable kind of stuff that you can do with the double-blind things. And that guy responded very positively. And you see less spite, you see less anger when you don't automatically choose to see everything as trolling and see everything as just random attacks. It's weird. And again, that's maintenance, because that is keeping a stable enough mental attitude to withstand stuff that comes off as like unkind. Somebody might be like, oh, you believe all these things earnestly, and you probably think that you can hear it all with your ears tied behind your back, but you probably never heard of a ABX test. Maybe you should look into that. But what they say is, I call bullshit. I need the ABX test for this. And what they're thinking is, you've never heard of this stuff, and you're full of yourself. And as far as that kind of testing and thing is concerned, I'm aware of it, but I'm also aware of the limitations of where that runs out. There's a lot of interesting stuff. In the TPDF Redux YouTube video, I demonstrated it. I showed, like, here is the noise floor of the dither. Here is me cranking up DRes until it's loud. Listen to how far beneath this noise floor you can hear bits of the music, bits of the audio. That's going to be the same if your source file has background noise. You cannot simply go by the noise floor is at this level, therefore you can't hear anything else. That's crap. It's absolute garbage that you can't hear stuff going on. You hear stuff beside the noise floor, and it can be pretty good at obscuring things, but it does not replace anything that is at that amplitude or quieter. And by the same token, you can do ABX testing and prove without the shadow of a doubt, prove conclusively, this is a distinction that I can hear. If somebody didn't believe you, somebody didn't believe me, I can hear this thing every time. You can prove that to whatever degree of statistical certainty that you want. That doesn't also mean that you're not hearing things below that level. It's just less certain. It becomes more fugitive. The example that I used talking to that particular fellow was, you can have a grain of sand in your salad, and you're never going to chomp on it every time, but when you do, it's going to ruin your meal. You don't like that. We don't like grit in our leafy greens. It makes the salad much more yucky when you're not sure whether bits of it are going to scrunch. And the dither and truncation distortion, quantization distortion is like that for a lot of us. It is the grid and the salad scrunch where it just ruins things, even if we can't really pin down exactly where it's going to crop up, exactly where that little thinness, that little shallowness and cardboardness is going to get in the way. You just start having a negative reaction to all of it, being like, digital audio just sucks. And that's not necessarily so. You can do interesting things with it. When I start doing VCV rack streams, and I've been working on stuff like I was recently researching how do I type a URL in order to get the live chat for this very stream, which I don't actually need to do for this stream because this is the Q&A, but for stuff like, for instance, the Minecraft, for stuff like doing a VCV rack stream, where that's taking up pretty much the whole screen, I'm going to want to also be able to see chat while streaming what I'm actually doing. So I'm going to need to run another computer or something else, just whatever else, anything else, positioned elsewhere so that I can have the chat up somewhere so that I can see what people are saying. Because I'd like to work on being more responsive to one of the things that I've been doing with the music streaming for 2 years is going like, this is me over here. When I'm doing the music, I'm not responding to anything. And that's not necessarily the same as I'm making deathless art, all this is super wonderful. But it does have my full concentration. It does have my full attention, especially if I'm playing guitar along to a sort of cyborg machine that's making up chord progressions. And I'm trying to work out whether it's going to interesting places. And yeah, double-blind dither testing fellow was not a bozo. He was just raising a question. He didn't know whether I knew about that stuff. But one of the things I've been lacking in the music making is it's on a number of levels. One, I'm not necessarily generating deathless, priceless art or a brilliant DJ set right out of nothing. That's not really what that's about, and even if I tried to push it to that level, it wouldn't always work. What I'm doing there is like a laboratory. It's probably what I'm going to wind up identifying that stuff as, is it's the Airwindows Sonic Lab. Mind you, Sonic Lab is also a trademark of somebody, so we're not going to literally use that, but the Airwindows Sonic Research Laboratory. And anybody who wanted to check that out, you would basically be going over there and seeing me focus on that, which is not to say that there is no use to having chat around somewhere that I can see it. I'm probably going to have to drag out this old iPad and run it on that. And it'll probably involve a certain amount of setting up. Like I'll have to go look up the relevant thing and then run the dedicated YouTube chat thing in Safari on that iPad so that I could have it up on the screen and hopefully big enough that I can use it. But yeah, the again, maintenance, figuring out how these things work, making them work better together, bringing new stuff into them. And Stephen was asking me about something before I go. I'm going to go until 1:42. I know I started a tiny bit late, but I was engaged in doing all of that, like right up to 11. So about TPDF, the balance is skewed. Well, I can do that using the other side of this page and drawing pictures of it. Supposing these are beds, and this is a waveform. Your waveform is there, and then if you truncate it, you get this. You get audio that is coming only from these bits, and it's putting these stair-steppy things in. So what we've got is dither, which randomizes stuff. Instead of having the waveform like this, you've got the waveform plus 1 bit of noise, and that makes the result dance around between these values rather than just sitting in one until it switches over to the other. Adding the noise is dithering it, causing it to randomly fluctuate at the sample rate. But if you do that, the amplitude of the dither will change as you go. So what you do is you add another amount of dither, another random source, and that makes the amplitude even more randomized, and it covers a larger range. Rather than covering only 1 bit, it will cover possibly 2 bits. Now, maybe I'm going to have to get another piece of paper for this. You see that I drew these on top of each other. That's not really how it works. If you just add a random source, what you get is a dither, but it is offset. So if you have silence, like we can call that silence, then the output is always going to be randomly either the silence or the +1. And if you average that out, that would be half a bit of offset. Now if you have 2, it would be averaging 1 bit of offset. So if you add 1 and then subtract another 1, you've got 2 different random sources. That turns out to be enough to make it decorrelate both of the moments of quantization. But in theory, if it goes to the maximum, you've got maximum of 1 to add and then maximum of 1 to subtract. That goes back down to 0. But what mine does, originally by mistake, is it adds the 1 random amount, then subtracts another random amount. But what that's going to average out to is 50% again. So it's the same as if I was just adding one and then subtracting a random. Still ends up with the least you can get is 0. Actually, that's not necessarily. If you added 0 and then subtracted 1, it would get you to full -1. But the upshot of it is it ended up producing a small DC offset. And since we have added 1 and then subtracted 1, oh, now I'm getting confused, damn it. The idea is if you have half a bit of offset and a range of maximum, the maximum coverage on the one hand would be as if you added the 1 and then subtracted nothing, or added nothing and subtracted 1. Total range is still 2 possible bits. But if the way you've arranged it is covering a slight offset here, here's the range we end up with. It's centered around this one area. It's not centered around 0. That's why it's producing a small DC offset. But that means that it's capable of making the output go to this one, or this one, or this one. 3 possible outcomes rather than only 2. And TPD itself is not more than 2-bit, but my averageness of it was causing me to have a DC offset, forcing it to be in a different position. And that's why I was saying that, here, let's go over here now. Like if this is 0, I was thinking that maybe if I worked out a distribution where it should be possible to make it so that, say, we're spending a lot of our time on the one that's centered a little, at or a little over 0. And by the way, this is why sometimes truncation sounds appalling, is if you are centered on 0 and you have a tiny little waveform, it's itty bitty, eensy beensy, and 0 is your crossover point. Truncation turns your tiny eensy weensy little waveform into the loudest possible noise that it can make, because it is exaggerating that and making all the stuff that's on the faintest threshold of hearing literally 2 bits in size, because it's either less than 0 or more than 0. There's a 0 point where it's crossing over. So when you get nasty truncation sound that sounds appalling, it's because it's doing that. And dither basically replaces that with noise because it swamps the tiny amount in there. But it should also be possible to take the slight offset here and make it so that most of our time is spent here, and then a proportion equivalent to the golden ratio is on this area, and a proportion of 1 minus the golden ratio is covering this area. In other words, skewing the distributions of where that bottom line noise floor output is going to go, because it's always going to go over at least 2 quantized positions, like the 2 smallest ones available, the positive and the negative one. And you can also make it so that it goes into a 3rd position while still covering the same amplitude, basically. But it should also be possible to mess with the distributions of those. So yeah, it's 12:42, so we're going to wind down here. If it's not too hot, I can nap. If it is too hot, I won't be able to do that. But TPDF isn't necessarily more than 2-bit. By definition, it's not supposed to be, but I can manipulate it until it is using more than 2 bits without a increased amplitude at the noise floor while still being TPDF. That is why my TPDF is skewed in that way. There is that small DC offset that leads to it using more positions at the actual noise floor. So yeah, and it should be able to manipulate where it sits in the distribution. Technically, you could do that by taking a normal TPDF, where you've got your 2 random sources, say add 2 random sources and then subtract 1, and it will be centered. And it will only do the 2 bottom positions, but you could manipulate what you subtracted and come out with what works. I think golden ratio is likely to be advantageous there. It shows up in funny places. Like golden ratio shows up effectively in all pass filters, and I've had some interesting results fooling with those. Before I go, Joey is saying, looking forward to being able to use Near Space 2 again. Well, days of work putting up the old, and it's assuming you're on Mac. If you say again, you would never have been able to use it before, so days of work putting up the old DMG files and you will have it. Oh, Andy, hello, back for round 2. Yeah, I'm just about to tune out. Also, I never finished talking about the lyric dictionary. That's yet another thing that I'm working on, as well as a post about the tempo stuff that me and Bo Denarius have been working on. Bo's been throwing some ideas in my direction, and although I haven't followed every trail out from those, I think some of those are very good. And I never finished talking about the lyric dictionary. I started talking about the 1,000 words in the English language. I'm halfway through this. I am organizing that dictionary of the Upgoer 5,000 most common words in the English language into a rhyming dictionary. I feel that will be incredibly useful for writing pop songs and things like that. Because, think of something to express and then you're not sure where to go. Go to this arrangement of that dictionary and start looking up stuff that rhymes or reasonably well rhymes. And it should give ideas. And you can still use words that aren't part of that. Just beware. And know that if you're going for like pop hitness, then you probably want to be using these really simple words that everybody automatically is familiar with and hears. So yeah, on that note, let's jump back to OBS. We'll bid chat adieu. I'm glad things are working out for you guys. Plugs and things. And yeah, Elias, you can also shoot me questions on email or the Patreon. I especially like to answer the Patreon questions and things. But yeah, this is clearly a good context for that. It's always good to ask me stuff like that on live streams. So yeah, I'll catch up with you guys next week. May or may not have stuff going on. I'll probably get back into a more of a schedule, and things are probably going to still be like based on 11 in the morning, as near as I can tell. I've been doing that for a long time. I'm not really sure whether people need me to do it any differently. I gave up on the idea of doing the 3-hour music streams because that kind of that face planted really fast. But we'll see. Anyways, so long, chat. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.